Hi, everyone. My name is Jess, and I'm a senior biomedical science major with a chemistry minor here at S&C. I also have two people alongside me who are going to help me to take a deeper dive into the relationship between religion and conflict. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves as well?
Sure. Hey, everybody. My name is Logan, and I'm here studying biomedical science and communication.
Hi, everybody. My name is Joey, and I'm studying biomedical science and chemistry.
Awesome. Thanks, guys, for that introduction. So, again, like I said, today we're going to be diving a little bit deeper into conflict and religion. We've picked four themes that we really want to use as a guide for analyzing how religion can be connected to conflict. These themes include religious tolerance and intolerance, science and religion, religion in the workplace, and intra-religion versus interreligious conflicts. So we found some magnificent research out there about this conflict when it comes to religion. So, to build off that research, we decided to conduct interviews to better understand conflict and religion, especially from our peers. We want to hear their insight.
We reached out to individuals and got 100% feedback, which is great. We reached out to them because of their insight in one or both of the fields that Jess had mentioned would be very helpful. We discussed religion and science as well, and of course the other topics we'll talk about today. We have included snippets of each of these interviews to help us better understand the themes presented in our articles.
To start us off, we'll be discussing Bastas et al.'s and Surwandono et al.'s articles, which talks about despite religion being a factor in wars that have happened in modern history, it is not the main factor in why wars are created. We wanted to bring this up because this is a fundamental belief that both these articles disprove. Ever since 9/11, there has been a belief that religion is the source of most modern wars. In the modern era, wars are not started because of religion alone. There almost always needs to be a conflict of resource management, territory, or other major factors in order for the wars to occur. Conflict between religious groups only can occur when these factors are a more dominant issue in the conflict. There has been a recent increase in social and religious conflicts, but there is also an increase in finding a way to manage them more effectively. This completely contradicts the belief that has been held by many since 9/11. Our first theme we want to unpack is religious tolerance and intolerance. To explore the theme of religious tolerance and intolerance, we asked a close friend, Nick Adel, former S&C student, about how he faced this theme in his own way. From Rinkin Sharma's and Hakim's articles, both these articles discuss the concept of tolerance and intolerance in terms of religious and spiritual radicalization and government policy, which can lead to intolerance of religious groups. These articles explain how religion is a confounding staple in many lives of people and is ultimately influenced by the society around them. The last key thing we can glean from is a real example of how the majority religion or non-religious groups is not always in the right. This is important to keep in mind as we consider tolerance as we push through social and cultural changes that are important to us. Religious tolerance is a critical role in understanding one's personal identities. This is important as Nick talks about how he doesn't want to go learn from authority figures due to judgments that they might receive. Nick also talks about how the influence from parents have on religious education of their kids. We asked Nick about his own personal experience being a catechist at Old St. Joe's for younger parishioners.
Would you mind talking about your experience a little bit as a catechist and kind of, has there been conflict within that you've noticed, even between your students, because you are a wonderful teacher to them? Is there anything that you kind of notice that your students struggle with?
I would say being a catechist, I work specifically with early teens, and I would say that's definitely a point in all of our lives where you struggle with authority and you struggle with just authority. And I think it's hard to teach religion to those kids just as hard as it is to talk to kids our age about religion, because they don't want to hear an authority figure speaking down to them about something. And I think it's especially kind of nerve-wracking because if these kids go to public schools, they're not exposed to their faith. So it's hard for them to express their religious identity or even be comfortable talking about it. There's always kids that are, too shy to share out, and there's other kids that are maybe a little too enthusiastic for their age, which scares some of the other kids away. So I see conflict within that, but there's also conflict with parents, and I think that is reflected on just the church as a whole. if you go to any parish, there's always people who are questioning, why did the priest homilize on this topic? Or they don't agree with what the church, the parish council, agreed on this thing. So I think we see conflict both within our youth and our adults within the church, because that's something you can't help, is everyone has different beliefs and everyone has a different conception of what is right and wrong.
I think it kind of relates well with like Rink and Sharma's and Hakim's et al.'s articles, because of how he kind of talks about how public school feels like they're not really supporting his religion, and how they kind of have to almost hide it in a way. Where I feel like here maybe it's almost more, because we're a Catholic school, it's different, rather than say a public school, because there's no support, they're not as likely to express it. Where if you went to a religious school, they are more likely to like express it, but then maybe people that aren't religious can't express it.
Right.
I agree. I think like Nick's interview really talks about how the supportive community being tolerant and then kind of the parents being a little bit more intolerant. So the parents in Nick's personal scenario relate really well to that intolerance and government policy that was discussed in the Rink and Sharma's article, as well as the Hakim et al. Article, because their parents didn't want their children to talk about a particular issue. So this overreach can really lead to a lack of transparency to those that are discerning whether or not they want to be religious. So maybe it's because they fear that by discussing these harder issues with their faith, it's going to make their children choose not to continue identifying with that religion that the parents do. So this really ties into what we were discussing before with spiritual radicalization.
Yeah. As I kind of said before, but Nick also talks about how public schools almost indoctrinated them in a way where they feel like they should be more shy about their religion, not as open and expressive about it. And this may lead individuals going against their religion or hiding what they identify with. Without feeling the support from, like, say, policies that are in place in these schools or in their institutions, it may lead them away from their faith or kind of convince them to hide their faith from others.
Mm-hmm. And again, like you're talking about, Rink and Sharma's article does aim to understand why some individuals do seem to radicalize along those religious lines. And in general, the main conclusions of that study was there was no evidence that radicalization is predicted by macro-level political or economic grievances. However, radicalization is strongly associated with individual-level psychological trauma, troubled social relation history, and then process-oriented factors as well that include religious identification and exposure to radical networks.
Yeah. If you wanted to maybe sending to your kids to more religious school could maybe build them to be more radicalized and maybe become more intolerant of other groups, whereas maybe you could say the same thing with public schools with people that maybe don't believe, that maybe they don't. If people feel like they're not being expressive, then maybe that could radicalize people. This aspect of social relations is exactly what Nick's experience is dealing with. By picking and choosing what their children are listening to, it pushes them to only be exposed to topics that are more comfortable within their faith, which can lead to what we have seen increasingly into our own country when it comes to, say, politics.
Definitely. And I also think that both of these articles really showcase tolerance and intolerance. Tolerance is due to kind of pushing more of the social and cultural rules to be more accepting of others' beliefs, due to the idea that being in a religious majority does not mean that the society as a whole should be oppressive to religion or religious minorities. Both Rink and Sharma's articles, as well as Hakim et al.'s article, collected data that support the idea that areas with past conflict of religion show higher intolerance. And I think that kind of definitely goes along with how Nick was talking and speaking for his own personal experiences.
I agree.
Yeah, especially when it comes to more of an individual basis where, say, if somebody gets a bad experience with their faith or they kind of left the church for whatever reason, then that can definitely show a different, higher level of tolerance depending on where you're from in the local area. So we're going to continue with our next topic. So our next theme is talking about science and religion. So we asked two close friends of ours, Harrison and Joseph, questions relating to science and religion. Science and religion are believed to be opposing one another. Zerzechna et al. And Fitz et al.'s articles discuss this topic of science and religion. These articles dive deeper into the topic of whether or not scientific groups and religious groups are compatible with one another, and whether or not religious scientists are seen lesser than by as their non-religious scientists. In these articles, they made an interesting discovery that people in non-religious scientific groups view science and religion to be in conflict with with one another, and religious groups do not. We asked both Harrison, who states that he's not outwardly religious, and Joseph, who is a practicing Catholic, whether they believe science and religion to be in conflict with one another.
I don't believe that science and religion conflict. I think that they operate in somewhat different spheres. I think that some religion and philosophy go hand in hand. I think that science operates in a slightly different sphere, where science is more interested in the material world because that's what we can physically observe. As a chemistry major, I do a lot of physical observations in my classes, and hopefully what I'll do with my career as well. But I think that when we're talking about religion, we're talking about a truth of something that we can't physically observe, where science I feel like doesn't have the tools needed to prove or disprove religion. I don't think there's much of a conflict there. I think there are some religions where you could have conflict if they make scientific claims that are wrong, but I think that as a whole, I think that we're talking about two different spheres, one more that you can observe physically and one that you can not observe physically. I feel like as far as a heightened sense of conflict between science and religion, I feel like I don't particularly see that. I feel like there might be some who would claim that in like a more new atheism type style of scientific, using science against religion. But I think that overall, I don't think there's a heightened sense of science being against religion.
Now, let's listen to Harrison as he discusses his views on the conflict between religion and scientific groups.
I think it really depends. So, overarching, when you boil it down to the main ideas, especially within biology, and once you start getting into kind of the foundational theories of physics, they kind of innately have to be contradictory, because this idea of raw biology is saying, primordial soup, we have RNA. RNA somehow manages to bind together. That stabilizes it. Eventually, we start messing around with some of the hydroxyl groups. We get DNA. DNA gets a surfactant that allows it to kind of have its own nucleus, and then we get cells. Mm-hmm. And then we evolve over time just by, kind of this purely random chance, right? And then pure religion, depending on what religion you are, has a very specific creationist story of usually one higher level god producing something, and then potentially lower level gods being produced as a part of that. With Hinduism, some of the kind of things like that. I think when you take something with a little bit more nuance than that, I don't think they have to be, right? It's this idea of, because I have much more experience with like the Christian Bible and everything like that. How old is Noah when he built the ark? Wasn't he 400 something? Or he's at least over 100.
Oh, yeah.
So this idea of timing is very off, right?
Yeah.
And we start saying these ideas of, God built heavens and the earth in 7 days. What was it, day 3 the sun was built or something akin to that. So what is even those first 2 days if there's no daylight cycle? So the timing is, I think, very relative. And I think that you can kind of boil things down to if you want to have a creationist story and then have this idea of kind of microevolution after that, I think people can work with that. I think there's been a lot of foundational science is done through religion. I mean, if you go over on that wall there's tons of people. Gregor Mendel, huge into genetics, which is kind of the foundational science behind evolution. A lot of people that have worked heavy on evolution theories have been religious, even to this day. Some of the kind of foundational minds, I guess you'd say, in modern day evolution are spiritual, at the very least. Science historically has had a pretty rough time with the church, especially in the early kind of periods of investigating science, and then kind of every time we step foot into a new door, we get a little bit of kickback from certain religious institutions, mainly like the Catholic Church, right? And the Pope is saying that, IVF, is that something that God would have wanted? So we start kind of getting into little barriers each time, and I think having that discussion where we can be both scientifically minded and having a religious background is going to be really helpful in kind of working through those barriers. And I think a lot of people argue that this idea of if you're not religious, you're finding out, how did this random stuff happen? What is the background behind it? But I'd argue that with religion, right, you can, if you believe there is some ordainedly, innately created process, it's not about finding out why it happens, it's about finding out why it was engineered that way. So you can do the same thing, just with slightly different background logic, and it does the same thing. And I think that bridging that probably helps a lot.
I think it's really interesting kind of to see their perspectives and somewhat they align, but not totally. Joseph's very much like, nope, they're not in conflict. Like, I can see people think that maybe they are, but like, I don't think so. Whereas and he's, Joseph's very religious, whereas Harrison's someone who maybe doesn't practice religion, or it's not something that's involved in his everyday life. He doesn't outward say exactly how he feels totally, but he's a little bit more like, oh, well, they're kind of there. And like you were saying, Joey, like religion kind of slows down that scientific process. Harrison is a very big scientist. He's someone that like very logically thinks. So that maybe has some sort of, I guess, sway on his opinion as well. So it's just kind of interesting to see two scientists and sort of their opinion on both.
Yeah, because obviously our intended audience is college-age students, and both of these are, one of them is very religious in the scientific field, one of them is very not outwardly religious. So I just think it's a really stark comparison between the two of them. Likewise, they also found that people who are religious in the scientific community cannot perform scientific studies as well as non-religious scientists. This is still true for individuals who say that religion is not in conflict with science. Additionally, religious scientists in the articles claim that they feel the need to hide their religious identities while in the workplace. We asked Harrison about this concept.
Yeah, I think it really depends. Certain fields, less so than others. I think when you look at things like, obviously, like the social sciences or like physics and chemistry, you can avoid a little bit more of that conflict. Yeah. Something with biology, I think innately is a little bit more conflicting to some ideas of religious institutions, just because, our ideas were investigating evolution or investigating how bodies are made or how they function and why and what random events have occurred to build it this way. And especially once we start getting into developmental biology, that gets really interesting. So like iPS cells, where we're having these cells that aren't technically like human. They're human cells, but they're not a human. We can engineer those to mirror foundational developmental stages within biology, or within development, excuse me. And it's not really clear, like, is this a person at this point? Because it's now functionally, we couldn't insert it and it would grow into a being, at least theoretically. Now, there's some laws on that we can't go past 14 days, kind of post-conception when we're working with anything like that.
And I think these topics, especially with like iPS cells, is it right that we can take them out and we can test our babies to see, hey, do you have Tay-Sachs disease? And then what do you do with that information? So I think that's something that's very difficult for a lot of people to deal with as well. So like you were saying, Joey, kind of being open-minded and also seeing both sides of it. We have to see the science, but we also have to see the religion. We have to appreciate both. You can't just do one or the other. You kind of have to see both a little bit. And I think for some people that's difficult to work through that.
Building off of the idea of how science and religion can kind of influence the lab environment, we also want to talk about religion in the workplace as a whole. Lucero Jones and Jungs et al.'s articles talked about how religion influences decisions within the workplace, and about how religion may influence job performance. Having divine struggles and troubled relationships with God may exacerbate destructive habits and psychological effects from that troubled relationship. Stress affects you and those around you, of course, and the conflict that can arise within ourselves and between others can and will lead to a deleterious relationship with others and yourself. We asked Jack, who identifies as a Catholic, for his thoughts on how divine struggles influence his performance at the workplace.
Do you believe that having divine struggles or struggling with religion can lead to increased conflicts in the workplace?
Probably. Having struggling with religion and with faith is a part of having faith. I don't think there's ever been a person of faith who hasn't struggled with their religion. I think there are sort of two general paths that can be followed from that struggle, and you can, kind of dive deeper into it, ask yourself, why am I feeling this? Why is this coming about? And answer those questions. or you can kind of shove it down and just say, no, I don't have to deal with this right now. And I think that is when conflict can come about, because you're dealing with your own personal things and you have this tension within yourself, and that's always going to be reflected in your relationship with people around you.
He made it really clear that although it may affect the performance in the workplace, there are many other factors that also affect our work performance beyond these things. So also looking more into our articles, they both do talk again about how religion can influence our career paths. It talks about how Latter-day Saints or LDS women, who are also known as Mormon women, view looking for jobs differently because of their religious identity. Women who identify as LDS choose career professions based on their religion. Most of them begin at birth or children very young and become stay-at-home moms. So the article kind of describes how these women in business and being away from their family is not seen as a career that women should have. So we want to listen here to Isabel talking about her own experiences, exploring career paths as a spiritual woman, and how her religion influences this decision.
I grew up in, specifically, I was exposed to more of like my mom's side, where so like we're more like non-denominational, slightly Pentecostal, but like more non-denominational. It's like a lot of the churches, like it's like Assemblies of God. So with them, it's like I've seen like you pretty much like get out of high school, you get married, and then you have kids, and like you don't really work. So like coming to college, my grandma was like, "You're gonna meet a man, right?" And I was like, "Well, if it happens, it happens." But like, and just like a lot of my family members have gotten married like really young. And so, like, it's kind of just been, like, ingrained in my brain that, like, I kind of, like, not, like, on purpose, like, that, like, I kind of, like, work my family life around my career. So it's definitely been, like, something where I've thought about it, like, oh, like, well, if I want to have, like, a kid or two before I'm 30, what do I have to do? Can I do this? Because it low-key was, like, sort of affecting, like, do I want to do grad school? Do I wait to do grad school? Which is like so crazy because I'm like, that could be how far down the line. But it was just something that like I've seen, and I like that my parents are younger, and I'm like, why am I thinking? I'm like, let me just finish my like college degree. What the heck? Because like I'm like a first gen college student, so it's also like very different for me. So like I feel like what I've grown up with and like the beliefs that I have, like I feel like I have sort of, it's altered my brain, but like kind of like subconsciously almost. And obviously like with some of the beliefs that I have, I think that has like with like my opinion and stuff like that, for certain things.
Both Jack and Isabel did a really great job. Almost are like saying these articles for us. Like they almost back them up completely, where it's like how much our personal identities are intertwined with religion, and just how religion influences workplace performance and career decisions. Like, I just think it's really great. Now let's get into our final theme of discussion today, which is interreligious and intra-religious conflict. Indonato's et al.'s and Kelly et al.'s articles talk about how people may feel prejudice from inter and intra-religious groups. Both articles talk about how a key to producing an attitude of tolerance that builds a barrier between coexistence and acceptance in religion-fueled conflict. The articles say that the leader of each religion should continuously encourage resolution and improve relations between faiths. These articles allow us to be mindful of everyone's beliefs while also practicing our own religion.
This next segment of an interview, from an interview with a close friend of mine, Alex, discusses how other people have treated him in the past because of his belief on religion. When you're interacting with people in your lives, as we were talking about, so many people have so many different belief systems about this. Do you think that for those who know your take on religion, do you think those people treat you differently because of what you believe?
In certain situations, yes. I don't have a specific interaction off the top of my head, but given that I haven't been involved in the church or like the teachings that most children are like grown up with and taught,
Sure.
at like Sunday school, for example, I don't have that background. And so often I'm in interactions with other people, I'm treated more as though I don't understand since I haven't had that formal background.
In the interview that we just listened to, Alex says that he feels like he is treated differently in some situations due to his non-religious identity, and he believes that others treat him like he doesn't understand. He classified himself as an agnostic. This is very similar to the articles because they relate this to how religion is both encouraged by governmental policy and societal rules, but that can also have positive and negative effects. At St. Edward College, for example, we are largely a Christian school, and because of that identity, we also have societal rules and policies that support religion here. However, Alex says that he feels like he gets different treatment because of his religious history, and the reason why this is the case is because the school doesn't do enough to encourage and promote others in applying that idea of coexistence and acceptance in our day-to-day life on campus.
Yeah, and in Dinanto et al.'s article, as well as Kelly et al.'s article, does really talk about how religion can have both helpful and harmful influences on our personal relationships with others. Religion can bring people together, but it also can drive a wedge between relationships. So it's highly beneficial to have a mature and constructive conversation about this. One of our conversations with Isabel was deeply personal conversation that she had, and although her and her grandma do share a very similar religious belief, they both practice and live their spirituality differently on this current issue. So we're going to take a little listen to Isabel talking about a situation concerning a controversial topic within her same family and religious community. Have you ever experienced situations where you differ with someone on the same issue, but you come from the same religious background?
Yes. Actually, it was my grandmother. And I don't even know, it was like, I don't even know how it was brought up. I think it was something on like a TV. It was like a news article. Oh my God, yay, media. And my grandma is very one way on a topic, and I'm very much like in the middle. Like I have an opinion, but I'm like, well, she was visiting her. I was like fresh out of high school. I think it was like freshman year, like college here. And I had just mentioned it or something like that because it was on TV. She bawled to me. She was like thinking I was like almost horrible. She was like, "How could you think that way? And it's my own grandma." And I was like, "What the heck?" I was so confused, and I was like, had never seen that side of my grandma and stuff. And then like weeks after that, like she would be sending me articles of like her side and being like, well, look at this, look at this, look at this. And I was like, my own grandma hates me for like my own opinion, basically, is what it felt like. And I was like, oh my God. And this is like my mom's mom. So like the religion, like I went to church with them growing up and stuff like that. And like for Sunday, like I went to like the church camp that my mom went to when she was younger and stuff like that. So, and like my mom and I have this same like opinion, but like my grandmother does not. And I was like, okay, my grandma is a very traditional Christian woman. She never really worked. She did like secretary type jobs. Otherwise she was at home baking. She baked for like the neighborhood around her, which is all totally fine. It totally is amazing. And people who want to do that, love them. I cannot bake a single thing in my life. But I was just shocked. Like I had to text my own mom and be like, can you get grandma to like stop doing this? I was like, because I feel uncomfortable. Like it was just constant and bearing. And I was just like, I'm like, grandma's making me uncomfortable, which I would never thought would ever like happen in my life. So it was just like a really weird experience. And then I love my grandma, but like when people don't agree with her, she like is sort of, and I realized as I've been growing up, like she's kind of like manipulative almost. And I was like, girl, and she was like sending me like movies and stuff on like the topic too, and I was like, girl. And so so that was a really interesting one, and too with like a personal, like someone was not what you expect.
All right, so although Isabel and her grandma have very similar religious beliefs, they also do disagree on fundamental topics like she was talking about here. Isabel even says like she needed her mom to go and tell her grandma like, hey, you need to back off, you need to stop, just because her grandma was like sending her all of these articles. So this relates a lot to our articles because even though they have that same core belief, they can still disagree on current issues, which do cause conflict.
I agree. And that connects perfectly into our final interview of our segment today, which discusses the idea of subgroups within religion, or intra-religious groups. Hilda, a good friend of mine, was willing to share her opinion on this, as well as how the understanding of intra-religious groups is important to consider when discussing religion. It is also important to keep in mind that we do have a lot in common, but there are also differences between belief systems that, again, should be recognized. So here's a great segment from our interview with Hilda on this topic.
I know when I was in Jordan, we had a discussion about the different groups of Islam, especially where it's the Sunni and the Shia.
Yeah.
Are those the correct names for the groups? They are. Okay. Is there, if you don't mind me asking,
It's
which
okay.
group would you be a part of?
The first choice, Sunni.
Sunni? Okay. And then how do your interactions with people of both groups differ? Or maybe they're the same. I'm not sure.
I've never met a person from the other faith.
Really? Okay.
Never.
Okay.
But people from the same faith as mine, I don't think we ever differed.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. And could you remind me and the audience what the difference is between those two?
Yeah, sure. The main difference is that in my religion it says that God sent a prophet named Muhammad, which is the most common name in the world,
That makes sense.
or Muhammad in Arabic, whatever. So in my faith, which is the Sunni, we believe that Muhammad was the prophet, but for the other group, they believe that the prophet should be his cousin,
Okay.
but
Okay.
by mistake, Muhammad was the prophet.
All right.
That's how they believe.
Okay. Okay. So then it's
So
just a
they
question.
know that it was the prophet, but it was by mistake.
I understand.
I was very happy that she emphasized the point of strong unity that exists within a faith system, where she mentioned that she had never met a Shia person before, and I think it must be less than 10% of Muslims, of those who practice Islam, are of the Shia subgroup. But at the same time, she mentioned that those within her group, the Sunni, also have kind of the same thought process when it comes to behavior and how we should interpret the law and their holy texts, the Quran as well. And that's very powerful to hear, of like they're all unified behind this idea of Muhammad and then Islam as a whole.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us today on our journey of understanding and unpacking the conflicts we see within and connected to religious groups. This discussion was filled with a lot of different perspectives that helped us to enrich our current understanding of religion. In the future, we can definitely apply what we have learned in this class to discuss this complicated and meaningful topic with those around us. We have to thank our guests as well, those we interviewed, for being open with us or being honest with us, or even being willing to talk about this issue with us, because it's a bit of a hot button topic. And I just want to thank the guests and those we interviewed. So thank you so much if you partook in this dialogue with us today. So, and for those who are listening in the audience, thank you again for joining us, and we hope to continue this discussion again soon. Thanks, guys.